Today, I'm going to use one of my own theories to explain something that has quietly destroyed more wealth than any stock market crash in recorded history. Not because the theory is complicated, it isn't. And anyone who tells you physics is complicated is either protecting something or selling something. But because the structure of the idea maps so cleanly onto what inflation does to ordinary people, that once you see it, you will not be able to look at your savings account the same way again. That is not a promise of comfort. It is a promise of accuracy, but I find accuracy more useful. Let's start with what is actually happening to your money. Inflation is not complicated. More currency is created than the economy has grown to support. More money chasing the same amount of good. Prices rise. The purchasing power of every unit of currency you are holding falls. This is arithmetic. The reason it feels complicated is that a significant number of people benefit from you finding it complicated, and those people have had considerable time and resources to cultivate that feeling. They have done a good job. I am here to undo some of it. Hyperinflation is the same mechanism with no speed limit. Germany, 1921 to 1923. A loaf of bread cost 160 marks in 1922. By November 1923, it cost 200 billion marks. Workers were paid twice daily because the morning's wages had meaningfully less purchasing power by afternoon. People brought wheelbarrows of cash to the market. There are documented cases of someone leaving their wheelbarrow outside under a shop and returning to find the cash left on the ground and the wheelbarrow stolen. The thief correctly concluded that the metal was worth more than the currency it had been used to transport. I was living in Berlin during this period. I had a salary in marks. I watched the price boards change at the same bakeries I visited every week. I am not going to make this about me, but I will say that there is a specific quality of understanding you get from watching a currency dissolve in real time that you cannot fully acquire from reading about it afterward in a stable one. Zimbabwe, 2008, annual inflation of 897 sextillion %. The government issued a banknote with a face value of $100 trillion. This is not a typo. Venezuela, Turkey, Argentina, the same sequence, different countries, same mechanism, same ending. The people who understood what was happening repositioned. The people who didn't held currency. The distance between those two groups, measured in purchasing power at the end of each episode, is not a small rounding error. It is the difference between financial survival and financial erasure. And in every single case, the information required to understand what was happening was available. The pattern was not hidden. It was simply not recognized as a pattern by the people who needed to recognize it most. Here is where my theory comes in, and I will keep it brief, because the physics is not the point. The financial structure it describes is the point. Special relativity at its core says this: two people can begin at exactly the same position, be subject to exactly the same external conditions, and end up in completely different places, simply because of how they were each moving through the environment. Same starting point, same universe, radically different outcomes, not because one was smarter or luckier. Because of positioning, your savings account is a perfect demonstration of this principle in action, and not in a way that reflects well on your savings account. Take two people, same city, same year, same income. One holds wealth in currency, savings, fixed salary bonds denominated in the local currency, responsible, conventional, exactly what they were told to do by every piece of financial guidance aimed at people who are trying to be careful. The other holds assets, real estate, equity, in companies that produce real things, commodities, anything whose value is connected to something that exists independently of the currency being used to price it on any given day. And inflation arrives. Not hyperinflation yet, just the regular kind, the kind that gets officially reported at one number and experienced at a somewhat larger one. For the cash holder, the number does not move. This is the entire problem, and I want to be precise about it because the precision matters. The number in the account is stable. The salary arrives in the same denomination. Every numerical indicator available to this person says nothing is changing, What is actually changing continuously, invisibly, without appearing on any statement is what the number can do. Every year, the same amount of currency buys slightly less. Every year, the savings represent a slightly smaller claim on real goods and services. But the number stays, so the sensation stays. And the sensation is, I am stable, I am being prudent, I am doing this correctly. Economists call this money illusion. The brain registers the nominal value, the number, and processes it as real value, the actual purchasing power. The number is 50,000. Last year it was 50,000. Therefore, my position is unchanged. This logic is wrong in a way that is simultaneously understandable and extraordinarily costly. In Berlin, in 1922, the people who felt most financially secure were frequently the people whose savings were about to be completely eliminated. The feeling was genuine. The security was not. The number was performing its only actual function, which is to look like a number. What it was not doing was accurately representing what it could claim in the real world. The asset holder is living through the same inflation from a completely different position. The nominal price of what they own is rising. The property costs more in currency terms. The equity is worth more in currency terms. From the outside, this looks like they are getting wealthier. They are not. What is happening is that their assets are repricing to reflect the deteriorating currency, which means the real purchasing power of their position is being roughly preserved, while the cash holders is being steadily consumed. Same inflation, same city, same economy. One person's position is moving with the erosion, the other's is being eroded. This is not a metaphor. This is the arithmetic of two different relationships to the same force operating on both of them simultaneously when the inflationary episode resolves. And they all resolve through currency reform, economic shock, or simple exhaustion. The two people compare what they have. The gap is not small. In Germany, people who held real assets through the hyperinflationary period came through with their purchasing power substantially intact. People who held marks came through with marks, which by November 1923 were being used as wallpaper and kindling because the paper itself had more practical value than its face denomination. Same country, same crisis, but completely different outcomes based entirely on what each person was holding when the force arrived. Now, I want to be specific about what actually moves with inflation and what gets consumed by it, because this is where the practical usefulness of understanding the mechanism lives. Currency and fixed income instruments denominated in the inflating currency do not move. They are stationary by design. A savings account that promises you 50,000 units of currency will deliver 50,000 units of currency regardless of what those units can buy at the time of delivery. The number is honored. The value behind the number is a separate question, and one that the account does not address and was not designed to address. This is not a flaw. It is a feature of the instrument that becomes a serious liability under specific conditions, specifically the conditions created by sustained currency debasement. Real assets move, property reprices in nominal terms over inflationary periods, equities in companies that own real productive capacity and generate real earnings reprice. Commodities reprice. Foreign currency held in a more stable monetary regime gives you an external reference point, something outside the closed system of the inflating currency, that allows you to see your own motion rather than experiencing it. None of these are risk-free. Real assets carry their own volatility, their own liquidity constraints, their own sector-specific risks. But the nature of the risk is different from the risk of holding currency through inflation and different. In a specific and important direction, the risks of real assets are visible and acknowledged, while the risk of holding currency is invisible. Those are not the same thing. Treating them as the same thing is how you end up with a wheelbarrow full of currency and no wheelbarrow. I want to say something honest about timing because I think the topic demands it. There is no formula that tells you exactly when to reposition at what rate an inflation will accelerate or how long an episode will last before resolution. Anyone offering you that level of precision is selling something, and what they are selling is false confidence at a price that will eventually become apparent. What I can tell you is structural. unusual. Inflationary pressure operates continuously and in one direction. The purchasing power of currency in a system where currency creation is politically controlled will, over time, trend downward. The rate varies. The acceleration varies. The terminal point varies enormously from the mild and manageable to the catastrophic and civilizationally disruptive. What does not vary is the direction of the force. In Germany, the people who repositioned in 1920 and 1921, before the terminal acceleration, when the inflation was real but the hyperinflation was still ahead, came through the episode in fundamentally different shape than the people who repositioned in late 1923. The information was available earlier, pattern was legible earlier. The force was operating earlier. The only difference was when each person acquired enough external perspective to see their own motion for what it was and decided to treat that perception as real rather than anomalous. Most people wait. Waiting feels like prudence. Moving feels like panic. This is a consistent feature of every inflationary episode in the documented record, and it consistently produces the same distribution of outcomes. The people who move early look wrong for longer than is comfortable. The people who move late are correct about the timing and incorrect about the cost of waiting. The people who never move, who trust the number, because the number is stable and stability is the metric they were given to discover at resolution, that stability and security are not synonyms and that the distinction between them is worth understanding before it becomes expensive to misunderstand. The inflation does not care about your relationship to the number. The currency erosion operates at its own rate regardless of your attention or your approval. The number will continue to look like a number. What the number actually represents in real world terms will continue to change. You cannot control the rate of that change. You cannot control the decisions made by institutions that are considerably larger than you and oriented toward interests that do not perfectly align with yours. What you can control is your position relative to the force, what you are holding, how you are moving through the environment relative to the erosion rather than inside it. That is the point. Same starting position, same external conditions, completely different outcomes based entirely on positioning. My theory describes this in the context of physics. Your financial life demonstrates it in the context of money. The structure is identical. The stakes in the financial version are for most people considerably more immediate. I'm Einstein. See you next time.